Fantastic. So again, welcome. Thank you all so much for joining me this morning. This morning, we're going to be talking about the 3-minute thesis competition. My name is Hugh Milligan. I'm ANSWER's Online Engagement and Experience Officer. I'm responsible for all of our online engagement channels, our website, mailing list, social media, so on. But I also run all of our online and postgrad specific training. In years previous, even before ANSWER came into being, I ran training for 3MT as part of NUPSA. That's been our role in the competition over the last few years, to help prepare you, to help give you an idea of what the competition is, and hopefully get you very excited about participating. So in this workshop, we're going to be looking at these things quite broadly. So what the competition is, I'll give you a little bit of context of how it's sort of developed and how it's arrived at this point. More specifically, how virtual 3MT is going to run. So if you're not aware, up until last year, up until COVID, 3-minute thesis was very much a live performance competition. It was a public speaking competition. And all of its rules and criteria were built around that. Some of those rules and criteria are unchanged. I think the spirit of the competition is still very much what it was. But obviously, in response to COVID, we've had to take things into a digital space. And so the way you participate is now quite different. It does present some new challenges in terms of how you produce and submit your video, but I think it also opens up some incredible opportunities. A virtual competition means that you can now compete even if you don't live or aren't studying near Callaghan, one of the other major campuses. It's also fantastic if you want to dip your toe in the water with 3MT, but are quite anxious about the idea of public speaking. The fact that you can pre-produce this video, that you can have several attempts, you can work through it until you're happy with it, and that you don't have to do that in front of a huge audience, can be quite inviting for some students as well. After that, we'll look at the current rules, judging criteria and eligibility. We'll look at some preparation advice, and there's some advice there on producing your speech, and also some advice on setting up the space itself where you're going to record. We'll look at, as I mentioned earlier, some examples of past winners. Again, these are video examples that we'll look at and then discuss a little bit. I can't play the videos directly through this window just due to copyright and technical issues. So again, I'm going to drop the links to each video into the text chat as we get to them. And I'll get you to watch it in your own browser, and then we'll come back together and discuss. And finally, there are some links and resources I'll share with you. These slides to this workshop that we're using now, I will send out to you all once we're done as well, so you can access these in your own time, and you can look at all the different links that are there. Fantastic. So what is 3-minute thesis? Well, as the name implies, it's a competition where you have 3 minutes to present the beating heart of your research, the very human core of what it is you're doing, to a non-specialist audience. It began in 2008 back in the University of Queensland. So even though it's a massive competition today, it did originate here in Australia. Back in 2008, there were major water shortages across the state, and residents were being encouraged to take 3-minute showers. And most residents had or were sent one of those little plastic hourglass sort of egg timers you get that you could stick onto the wall of your shower cubicle with a suction cap. And, it was something they were sort of getting residents to think about. One of these residents was the Dean of the Graduate School at UQ, who had the sudden brainwave that if you could have a shower in 3 minutes, could you also present your thesis to the world in 3 minutes? They say that it takes, on average, 9 hours to present an 80,000-word thesis. You have 3 minutes. During the live stage of the competition in years previous, trying to keep your speech within 3 minutes was often a challenge, because you could practice it and you could woodshed it down. But in the moment when you're on stage, there was a clock, looking at you and counting down and so on. And so you had that pressure. With a digital competition, of course, you can check your video and make sure your speech is shorter than 3 minutes before you submit. So these days, it's much easier to ensure that that your final submission is within time. Stages of the competition are held at a school/college level. Then there are university finals, and then there are actual national and international levels of the competition as well. That's still very much the same, even though it's now digital. And from an international perspective, the competition now straddles over 900 universities across 80 countries worldwide. This is a massive, massive international competition these days. And so it's a fantastic opportunity for researchers. Down the bottom here, you'll see it says only PhD students who've completed confirmation may compete at the virtual Asia Pacific finals. I hasten to say that is just for the international level of the competition. That is just the very, very top level. If you are a master's research student, or if you are a PhD research student who has not yet completed confirmation, don't panic, and please don't be dissuaded from participating, because there are many, many benefits you can get from participating in 3MT at a school, college and university level. You get tons out of this competition. You still get massive exposure. It opens up all kinds of opportunities, even if you're not able to move beyond that to the international level. So as I said, if you are thinking about it but think is it too early in my candidature to be competing, it's never too early in your candidature to compete in this. You can also enter this competition every year, while you're still a PhD or master's research student. So even if you just want to have a crack this year to sort of get a sense of it, see how you go, with an eye to sort of compete again in future years when you've got more research results and so on. As I've alluded to, there are many reasons you should absolutely participate in 3MT, but I think it's quite useful to see them articulated by Dr. Megan Rossi, who was the winner of the 2014 competition. She sums up very well, I think, the benefits you can gain. So there's a link I've got there on the slide. I'm just going to drop that link into the text chat, as I said. What I'm going to do is, I think it's about 2-3 minutes of video. Hopefully you can all see that there. You just want to click on that and have a watch. And as soon as you've finished, just raise your hand. And once about half of you have raised your hand, we'll move on and have a chat about it. Fantastic. So it looks like about half of you or more have had a chance to watch through that. If you haven't, that's okay. Just keep going and you can jump in as soon as you're done. So Megan raises quite a few things there. Obviously, your research may not be in the same discipline or the same field as hers, but I think many of the benefits she talks about are universal. As I mentioned before, 3MT is these days a massive competition. As I said, it's international, and it has or it attracts interest from representatives of different industries, of academia, of research from all over the world. There are, I suppose, for lack of a better term, almost talent scouts, basically, who are looking for emerging researchers who are doing work that aligns with their own, or who are doing work in a field that is of particular interest to them. So you never can tell who is going to reach out to you, what connections you're going to forge by getting your work out there. As I said, because the competition requires you to present your research in a way that's non-specialist, in a way that's quite human, it's a sort of elevator pitch. It's not you getting too bogged down in facts and figures. It's you appealing to the heart of other people. It's you sort of presenting your work in a way that is universally understood. So you can forge connections, as I said, in some of the most unlikely places by getting this out here. I mean, as I'm sure you know, the research sector is also increasingly competitive depending on your field. So, yeah, the opportunities it might open up for grant funding, for financial support, for other kinds of support are phenomenal. And it is never a bad thing to promote yourself as a researcher and have yourself on the radar of, as I said, it could be large organizations, large companies, different universities, and so on. So, you know, as I said, the greatest benefit really is just exposure. It's worth its weight in gold. There are, of course, prizes you can win, but they're really icing on the cake. The other thing it does do as well is it flexes a certain skill set that you may not have had much of an opportunity to develop previously. I think for most researchers, most candidates who spend a lot of their time in the lab or in the office working on a very, very specific problem, we don't always get a chance to develop that broader skill set around verbal communication, around multimedia literacy, around using layman's language, of finding a way to translate academic concepts into an understandable sort of parlance. These are all really critical skills that will help you throughout your career, and you will practice all of them as part of this. So as I said, it's a really, really worthwhile competition being involved in. And as I said before, it is now virtual. So where it was once public speaking, now competitors will pre-record and edit their speeches to ensure no disadvantage due to technical issues with live performance. So this explains why this is not, say, a live performance via Zoom, because they do not want to disadvantage anyone that has, for particular reasons, an inability to do that, as with other competitors. So you will have the opportunity to record this, to cut this together and submit it by the deadline. Videos can be recorded using any available mobile or recording device, so you can record on anything you want. Videos will then be uploaded to a Vimeo account. Competitors will need to create their own account. Now, this instruction comes from the tournament organisers. The way that UQ runs it currently is that they have all the competitors upload to Vimeo. This simply means that there's no issue with trying to send directly very large video files. There's no issue with whether someone's video file is the wrong file type to play for the judges. It means that everyone is using the same platform, and it's very easy for the judges to then watch these videos and score them. Having said that, the individual schools here at the university are currently organising their own heats, and they have been told that they do have a little freedom in how they run their own heat. So what I would say is, by default, I would create a Vimeo account for free and upload your video when it's ready. But if your school or college or the university itself at any stage in the competition has given you specific instructions on how to submit your video to them, then absolutely follow those instructions as well. So I think most schools will stick with Vimeo as well, just for consistency. But as I said, if your school happens to say to you, no, we'd like you to also send us a copy of your video in this, SharePoint folder or this, whatever it is they do, then absolutely follow their advice as well. All right, let's look at the rules. As I said, some of these are more or less unchanged from previous years, while some of these are obviously quite new to a digital format. So the first rule, and the most important rule by far, is that yes, your presentation cannot exceed 3 minutes. You're limited to 3 minutes maximum. I will say at this point though that it does not specify, and you are not taxed in any way on, a minimum. It might seem curious that you would want to make your speech shorter even than 3 minutes, that you might want to make it 2 minutes 30 or 2 minutes 40. That might be a bit excessive in cases. But as you'll see later, there are very good reasons why you don't necessarily want to cram your speech as close to 3 minutes as possible. You will not be disqualified in any way for going, any margin below 3 minutes. As I said, the maximum is all that counts. It's a very good question. So someone's asked, is that 3 minutes talking time or 3 minutes recording time? As you'll see, the next criterion here does sort of address that a bit. So you'll see presentations are considered to have commenced when a presenter starts their presentation through speech. Timing does not include the 3MT title slide and commences from when the competitor starts speaking, not at the start of the video. No, it means you're well ahead of the curve. So it's exactly as it says here. So your 3 minutes is from the second you start talking to the second you finish talking. Your video is going to be longer than 3 minutes when you submit it, primarily because you will have a title slide at the beginning. So we'll see this in a later slide, but to identify yourself before you start, you will insert a static slide that has your name, your school or college, and essentially the title of your 3 minute talk. That's so that the judges and so the audience knows who you are, and you do not have to introduce yourself as part of the speech. Your speech does not have to include, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm from the school of so-and-so. It's not to say you can't do that, but again, there are reasons why you'd probably be better not to. And in any case, you won't have to, because the title slide will tell everyone who you are even before you start presenting. So yes, don't panic if the video you submit is 3 minutes 10, because the first 15 seconds is your title slide. Oh, that's a bit long, but you know what I mean. Because the judges will have been told not to start timing until you start speaking. Videos must meet the following criteria. They must be filmed on the horizontal, so they must be filmed in landscape, not portrait. Again, you'll see there's a reason for that. Filmed on a plain background, filmed from a static position, filmed from one camera angle. They must contain a 3MT title slide at the beginning, and they must also contain a 3MT PowerPoint slide, and that will go in the top right corner to the right side, or it will be a cutaway. Again, we'll look at this, but as part of the competition, you are able to use a single static slide. It must have no animations, it must have no transitions, it is just one slide. It can contain anything you want, but as you'll see, there are some slides are better than others. There are some tips I would give you on how to have a slide that suits your speech well. The thing I will immediately say is, don't think of this slide the way you would an information slide for confirmation or a conference. This is not the kind of slide that is going to be packed with graphs and charts and dot points and information. That's not the spirit of this competition so much. Again, you can do those things, but I can tell you from experience, they're not particularly effective. The kind of slide you're going to produce is going to be probably an image, some kind of visual accompaniment to you that captures the emotional heart of what you're saying. And we'll see some examples of these. Are there any questions about those rules there? There are more to come, obviously. Just, again, if you've got any questions, just drop them in as we go. A single static slide is permitted in the presentation. Oh, looks like I've jumped the gun now. No slide transitions, animations, or movement of any description. This can be visible continuously or cut to as many times as you like for a maximum of 1 minute. So again, we'll see some examples, but you have a couple of choices in how you integrate your single slide. One option, I'll see if I can emulate it here, is, I don't know if you can see me in the corner there, the camera might just be on the slide, but if you move yourself slightly to one side of the camera, so one side of the shot, you can leave a blank bit of wall beside you, and you can choose to insert your slide post-production as a picture-in-picture. You can sort of appear beside you the entire time you're talking. That's one option. The other option is you can stand in the very center of your shot, and you can edit the video later so that while you're talking, the camera cuts to the slide and then cuts back to you. So you can do that as well. The only thing they've specified there is that it's a maximum of 1 minute. It means that when you cut to the slide, all of those cutaways added together cannot be longer than 1 minute total. I'd say that simply because by that point, it would be quite distracting. It would pull focus from you. And it means that you would be invisible to the viewer for more than a minute of your 3 minutes. It's really important that the judges can see you talk, because so much of your presentation is marked on your visual presence, your body language, your gesticulations, and so on. So again, if you use cutaways, they've just urged you there to use them sparingly. The 3-minute audio must be continuous, no sound breaks or edits. No sound edits or breaks. Again, this means that if you record several takes of your speech, you can certainly pick the best one and then submit it, but you can't go through them and say, I really like my opening in take 1, and I really like my middle section of take 3, and I really like the way I delivered the ending on take 7. So I'm going to take those bits and I'm going to stitch them together in iMovie and make a sort of Franken video. You cannot do that. What you submit must be one unbroken recording of you giving your speech. The idea is that this video is still supposed to emulate that sense of live public speaking. When you go out on a stage and present to an audience, you don't get to sort of do it 5 times and then pick the bits you like. You have to sort of go out there and give the best presentation you can. It's the same thing with this video. So it's got to be one single continuous audio recording. No additional props, so no costumes, musical instruments, laboratory equipment, and animated backgrounds are permitted within the recording. Quite a few of the rules you're about to see are based on this idea that you are to avoid gimmickry. The whole point of this, it is really you connecting on a very personal level with your audience and talking to them in a very human way about the research that you're doing. It's not about sort of wowing them with smoke and mirrors. You can't, as you'll see in a second, you can't have like music playing, you can't have a cool little video animation, you can't, that sort of stuff might be great if you're a vlogger and want to have really cool flashy videos. But this is very much about you front and center with, as I said, some simple enhancements like your slide, but everything you do to move your audience must come from your own delivery, must come from your own speech. It's one of the reasons they've also specified you must have a plain background, because if you've got posters and pictures and things on the walls, those could be construed by the judges to be props, to be set dressing, to be an attempt to sneak more visual information in there. So essentially there, no props, no gimmickry. Presentations are to be spoken word. So again, you can't sing, you can't rap, you can't, recite a poem. Obviously, if you've got a song or rap that can represent your research, you should absolutely put that out there in a separate video, and that's incredible. But for this competition, very much spoken word. So I've got a question here. Can the plain background be dark or must it be light? That is up to you. I mean, you'll see most video presenters that have submitted last year did go for a lighter background, but that is certainly not specified in the rules. I think it's something to consider when we get to the part about lighting in the room. So a dark background and a light background will have different effects, obviously. If you're dressed in lighter clothing and you're against a dark background, that's going to create a certain visual effect. Conversely, if you're in front of a light background, that's going to have an effect as well. It might also depend on what your slide appears to be. So if your slide has quite a lot of dark colors, you might run the risk of having those sort of fade a bit into the background if the background is also dark. So it is something to consider, I suppose, in terms of how you will appear and how your slide will appear. But as long as the background is plain, it can really be any color you want. There is actually, this is specified in one of the rules we'll see, but if you can actually record your video through Zoom, but if you do so, again, you cannot use one of those fancy sort of backdrops you create in Zoom, that makes you look like you're on a beach or on the surface of the moon. You can't use those. It would still be you on a plain background. No additional electronic media, so no sound or video files are permitted within the video recording. So again, no additional AV wizardry. The only thing you've got is your slide. The decision of the adjudicating panel is final, so it simply means no appeals. The schools should let you know just before your heats, and the university should let you know just before the finals who the judging panel will be. They have been instructed, because this is all about presenting to a non-specialist audience, schools and the university have been instructed to assemble their panel with people who absolutely are not involved in your discipline, or there might be one. So you might have one panelist, one judge who is from your research background, but then you may have several others who are, random academics from throughout the university, or members of the community, or other figures. So what I mean is, it's in my experience, unlikely that any of them will be necessarily known to you or that there might be a conflict of interest. However, if you think there might be for any reason, once you're aware of the judges, you need to let your school or the university know before the submission deadline and before the judging has occurred, because once it's done, basically. Submissions via video format, only video link provided to event coordinators. Files sent in other formats will not be accepted. Again, what this is simply saying is once you get to the highest levels of the competition, you have to submit your video as a Vimeo link. You have to upload it to Vimeo and send a link. But having said that, again, if your school has given you different instructions, follow those instructions. Entries for final adjudication are to be submitted from the school, faculty, or institute 3MT event coordinator. Competitors should not submit their videos directly to 3MT. I wouldn't worry too much about this one for the moment. I mean, it simply means that if you get through to the international level of the competition, the very, very final, you won't be submitting your video directly to 3MT. You'll be submitting it to the university, and the university will then submit it for you. So as I said, for the purposes, for the heats and so on, that's not really anything to worry about. Please note, competitors will not be judged on video/recording quality or editing capabilities, optional inclusions. Judging will focus on the presentation, ability to communicate research to a non-specialist audience, and 3MT PowerPoint slide. As we said at the beginning, the whole point of running the competition in this format is so that no one is disadvantaged by their access to particular technologies. So what they've said here is, you know, if you don't have the fanciest camera phone to record on, if you are not you know, an absolute expert on iMovie or Final Cut Pro and know how to cut it together to look all fancy, you will not be judged on your ability to do those things. As long as you can meet the other rules of the competition, the judges, and you'll see in a moment, the judging criteria are only based on the content and the structure of your talk and the manner in which you deliver it. That is absolutely everything you are marked on. So don't panic, as I said, you know, if you've had to knock something together a bit sort of ad hoc technology-wise in terms of your editing, if all the pieces are in there, you've got just as much a chance as anyone. After each competition round, competitors will have the option to either submit their current presentation or re-record and submit a new presentation for entry into the next round. So this is actually quite useful. So if you've gone through your school's heat and you know, you've passed on to the next round of the competition, that's fantastic. But in the meantime, you've looked at your video and thought, actually, I don't really like my ending. I want to tweak it a bit. Or actually, I don't really like the recording quality that day. I've actually found a better space to record in. You can absolutely re-record a new talk. You can make adjustments and you can submit a new video. Don't hold me to this, but last year, the colleges, or the faculties as they were back then, actually took their winners who were going to go on to the university finals, and they organised for them to come in and have a video professionally shot and edited for them, so that by the time they got to the final, everyone had very flash-looking videos. I haven't heard yet whether it's going to occur this year, but it's entirely possible it will. So you may even find that you will be given the option, if you would like, at later stages in the competition to have some assistance from the university to produce a really slick video. As I said, that's not a requirement at all, but it is something you are able to do. You are able to make adjustments and resubmit. Okay, so now we'll look at the actual criteria. So we've seen the rules. These are the points on which you will be marked. Now, in years previous, there were 2 or 3 times as many judging criteria as we're about to see here. There were quite a few of them, both in terms of comprehension and content and in terms of delivery. And to be honest, they got a little bit prosaic. Some of them were quite specific, and I think it led students to panic a bit and to assume that there was a particular mold within which they had to make their speech. I'm really excited to see that the criteria this year are much simpler. They're much broader. Obviously, they're giving you a lot more creative freedom to approach your speech as you see fit. There's no sort of one template on how to make a winning speech. And it's the thing you'll very quickly find with 3MT. There are 1,000 permutations of winning speeches. It really comes down to your personality, your presentation style, and also the kind of research you're doing. Some of you might make presentations that draw a lot on humor and on comic elements and sort of, you know, wit and things like that. Others will find those elements don't work at all for you or your research. So you might produce something that's quite powerful and has quite a lot of gravitas and is much heavier and weightier in its tone. Those are all equally appropriate, really, depending on who you are and what you're researching. So let's look at what they're marking you on. Presentation provided clear background and significance to the research question. Presentation clearly described the research strategy/design and the results/findings of the research. And presentation clearly described the conclusions, outcomes, and impact of the research. So let's unpack this a little bit. At the heart of your speech, whatever form it takes, you will be answering 3 questions. These 3 questions are really important: the what, the how, and the why. So the first one's straightforward enough. What are you researching? What is your project? Obviously, you're going to have to tell the audience, what it is you're doing. How is your methodology? So how are you going about this? And as I said, that's going to differ wildly depending on whether you're someone doing, qualitative research where you're surveying 1,000 people or several thousand people, or whether you're someone, in the laboratory, using a bunch of machines to produce something. Obviously, your methodology is going, and how you approach talking about it's going to be very, very different. But the third, and in my opinion, the most important question is the why. And it's actually 2 questions in one. Why is your research important to the world? Why is your research significant to all of us? What is its impact? But also, why is your research important to you? And that's a really important question to ask yourself. I mean, for all of us here who are, working in one of these fields, a PhD or even a master's degree, as you know, is an incredibly difficult journey. It's years of hurling yourself at a really specific problem in a very specific way. And there's quite a lot of repetition, there's quite a lot of determination involved. I don't have to tell you these things, of course. So it is useful sometimes to be able to actually take a step back from that and just come back to this question of, why am I doing this? Why did I choose to research this one specific thing? Why am I really passionate about this? Why have I chosen this instead of, this field or this field? Because passion is the engine that's going to drive your speech. The most important thing you must convey above all else in this 3-minute talk is an authentic passion for what you do. The audience, if you don't believe in the value of what you're doing and the importance of what you're doing, you will not get anyone else to believe that either. So the why, as I said, is really important, and there are many ways you can convey passion for your research. It does not have to be through crazy, wild, enthusiastic energy and waving your hands around. You can do it in a way that's quite subtle, that's quite understated. You can speak with a quiet intensity. You can, there are so many ways you can do it. But as I said, those are the 3 questions. Now, years ago, there was a criterion here that said something about, did the presenter spend too much time talking about one of these things and not enough time talking about another? They have removed that this year. And I said, I like that they have. You do not necessarily have to give absolute equal weight to the 3 questions. What I mean is, if you've got 3 minutes to speak, you don't have to say to yourself, okay, well, I'll spend 1 minute talking about the what, and I'll spend 1 minute talking about the how, and I'll spend 1 minute talking about the why. It's a bit more nuanced than that. And as you'll see in some of the videos we're going to watch later, some people spend, 2/3 of their speech really focusing on the why and hammering in the why. And their methodology might only be, 20 seconds worth, because their methodology might be fairly simple and it may not be the most interesting thing about what they're doing. The really interesting thing might be the outcomes or the impact. So as I said, as long as you've addressed those 3 to some degree and you haven't sort of glossed over any of them, you shouldn't have to worry too much, as I said, about a sort of cookie cutter mold of how much weight is given to each. That is very much something that's going to come through in the narrative you're going to tell, the story you're going to tell through your speech. Neither do you have to answer them in the same order. So you don't have to start with the what, and then go to the how, and then finish with the why. In fact, the majority of talks that I've seen start with the why. And the way they do that is usually through some kind of hypothetical. So a really common theme you'll see with a lot of speeches, not to say it's right or wrong, it's just quite popular, is for a student to say at the beginning, imagine you're walking down a road and then suddenly this happens, or you're driving along and suddenly this happens and you're suddenly in this terrible situation, and what would you do? Well, my research is about how to fix this, And by presenting to you this sort of scenario that you can relate to or that might make you feel something, they're talking about the why. They're telling you from the get-go, what is their research designed to address? Okay, so I've got a question here. What if you don't yet have results/findings for the second dot point, but can still answer the what, how, and why? That is a very, very good question. One of the most common questions I'm asked in training, particularly with my Callahan sessions and so on, is students who say to me, you know, I am in the first year of my degree. I haven't even started data collection yet. I don't know what my findings are. I don't know what my results are. How am I supposed to compete on an equal footing with someone who's in their final year and has all of this data they can draw on? It's surprisingly easy to do in a sense. All you have to do is, instead of saying, I found this, you know, my results were this, you simply reframe it as, it's my hope that, or it is my belief that we will discover this. You know, because I would hope, I suppose, that most of you have a sort of hypothesis going into your research project. You might have an educated estimation of what you are going to find with the results. It doesn't always play out that way, obviously, but it is absolutely sufficient to say it is my hope that we will discover a link between these two things, or we believe that there is a relationship between this, or that we can make this better. And in a sense, that also offers up an unexpected advantage, because when you talk about, it's my hope that we discover this, or it's my belief that we can do this, you are absolutely humanizing yourself as a researcher. You are describing yourself as a human being who has very personal human hopes and dreams about this research. That's a very romantic way of putting it, of course. But it is another opportunity for you to humanize yourself and to show passion. No, I really hope that we can discover this. Like that's clearly someone who has a deep-seated interest in what they're doing. So, as I say, I would simply reframe it as what you expect to find, what you hope to find. One of the presentations we'll see later from Sophia, I think she talks about how, you know, I don't have all my results yet, but the early findings show this sort of thing, which is what we'd expected to find. So as I said, work with what you know so far, work with what you have so far. And for the rest, it is absolutely fine to give some kind of estimation or to extrapolate. I should also mention that this applies to talking about the impact of your research. It is absolutely fine to extrapolate what you think the impact will be beyond your own research project. So I'll give you an example. A few years ago when I was running a training session, I had a student say to me, how am I supposed to talk about the impact of my research when my entire project is improving or enhancing this screw? It's one particular little screw that's used in, you know, certain things. And they said, my research is about making it cheaper to produce, making it more durable, more adaptable, easier to install, you know, just really enhancing this screw. How am I going to make anyone care about this tiny little screw that I'm spending years working on? And I said to this student, well, assuming that your research is successful and you make this better screw, what will the screw be used for? What do you think the screw, or what, you know, what is your understanding of what the screw is meant to be used for? And they said, well, you know, it'll build stronger buildings, it'll build, you know, more durable bridges or, you know, road constructs. It will, you know, because it's cheaper to produce, it can hopefully mean we can build bigger, stronger buildings in developing countries at lower cost. We can give more people access to, you know, earthquake-resistant buildings. They were throwing out all of these different possible applications. And I said to them, well, those all sound incredible. It sounds like your screw is going to save thousands and thousands of lives. It's going to give thousands or millions of people access to safe, affordable, durable housing. It's going, you know, it's going to do, your humble little screw is going to change the world. So it is absolutely possible for you to extrapolate what will lead on from your research. It's really exciting to think that even though your project is this one little step within your field, think about every other person who's going to use your findings to take more and more and more steps generationally. And all the way down the line, everything that happens as a result is because you did this, is because you created this thing, you enhanced this thing. So as I said, with 3MT, you don't have to worry so much about what is absolute and objective. And of course, facts and data will sort of play into it, but you can really enjoy drawing out the human elements of your research. What are the implications of what you're discovering here, of what you're advancing here? So as I said, when you look at the what, how, and why, really think about impact beyond just the next couple of years, the next 5 years. What can be done based on what you're doing now? And I think, as I said, that will also help even if you're in the early stages and you don't have many findings to draw on. You can still, hopefully have a really strong idea of where you want this research to lead, and that can really inspire your audience. So those are the criteria, as I said, around comprehension and content. Hopefully you're enjoying this lovely pep talk I'm giving all of you here. Okay, so judging criteria on engagement and communication. So again, these are simpler than they have been in previous years. There used to be very specific criteria around what was their, what were their hands doing, what was their body doing, what was their stance like. Obviously, these are all things you must consider, but again, they've rolled them all into a shorter list of criteria so that you can sort of play with those with a bit more elasticity. The oration was delivered clearly and the language was appropriate for a non-specialist audience. The PowerPoint slide was well defined and enhanced the presentation, and the presenter conveyed enthusiasm for their research and captured and maintained the audience's attention. So again, let's unpack these a little bit. The oration was delivered clearly. So again, things like rate of speech, your diction, these are all really important. Again, you get to record this as many times as you like before you submit a final video. So you have this unprecedented opportunity to actually do a few recordings, listen back and see if you're speaking in a tone of voice and at a rate that is clear and understandable, and whether you're adopting the proper tone. Again, it raises that idea of a non-specialist audience. There's a fine line to walk here. When you are adopting a tone for non-specialist audience, remember that your audience are still intelligent adults. While it's important that you avoid really complicated jargon, terminology, concepts, and we'll talk in a minute about how you can avoid or you can rework those, you don't want to slide too far in the other direction and turn it into an episode of Play School or Sesame Street where you start talking to your audience as if they're children. You don't want, in a worst case scenario, you don't want to sound patronizing, like you're talking down to your audience. As I said, the people watching this video won't likely have the same experience you do in your very specific field of research, but they will have their own skills, their own experiences, their own knowledge. And you can adopt a tone, as I said, as if you were talking maybe to a friend, a family member, a colleague in a completely different field, or a peer in a completely different field about your research. In terms of, as I said, how to thread that needle, when you have jargon or concepts that are within your research, you've got two options. You can either avoid it, or you can use an analogy and reframe it. So the first thing to ask yourself is, this particular scientific term I want to use, or this particular scientific concept, is it something someone absolutely must know about to understand my research? Is it the sort of thing where I cannot tell you what I do without using this term? If the answer is no, if you absolutely must use this term in order to explain your research, then as I said, you would use something like an analogy. And these are quite common. So one of the videos we'll see a little later, for example, one of the presenters is talking about stem cells in the body. She's looking at epidural stem cells. And she rightfully assumes that not everyone may know exactly what stem cells are and how they work. So she introduces this analogy where she talks about them as the blank tiles in a game of Scrabble. And she talks about how, blank tiles in a game of Scrabble are very powerful because they can become any letter. Similarly, stem cells are very powerful because they can shift into any type of cell. And so she relates the concept back to something that is more immediately understandable. So as I said, it's a matter of looking at the very sciencey, the high science bits of your research and saying, which of these can I just put on the table as they are and which require some explanation or some kind of image to help make them understandable. As we'll talk about later, the best way to gauge what you might have to explain, what you might have to leave out, is by practicing your speech with people who don't share your knowledge. So, practice your speech with your parents, with friends, with your neighbor, whoever it might be, and just say to them, was there anything in what I described that isn't entirely clear to you? Is there any term I used? Is there anything in my methodology that was at all confusing and that you think I could simplify or I could rephrase, essentially? The PowerPoint slide was well defined and enhanced the presentation. Again, the slide you use for this competition is going to be quite different, or should be quite different, to what you'd use in a purely academic setting. I'll give you another example. There's a student who I think came second in the competition at the university final level here at UON a few years ago. Her name escapes me, unfortunately, but she had a fantastic presentation about aphasia. So about an illness or a neurological condition she was trying to treat or to combat, where a person still has full cognition but loses powers of speech and has issues with their sensory input and so on. And she talked about, in very human terms, how terrifying it must be to be sound of mind inside your own body but unable to communicate with other people. How frightening and how isolating and how lonely it must be. So she had some statistics and things, within her speech about, how many people suffer from it and how common it is and so on. But she didn't have a slide with graphs and diagrams and things like that. Her slide was an image taken from above a crowd. It was a camera was looking down at a packed crowd in obviously a marketplace or a communal area. And there were also this sort of sea of tops of heads and hats and things. And at the center of the crowd was one person from above, where there was sort of a gap around them. The crowd seemed to be leaving a bit of a buffer around them. So they were sort of standing alone in the middle of a huge crowd. And she had adjusted the coloration in Photoshop. So all the crowd around them were all brightly colored and saturated and looked all lively. But this person isolated in the middle had all the color drained out, so they were black and white. So the center of the photo was black and white and the rest was in color. And it was this immediately arresting representation of what it would be like to be in the middle of this, sea of people, to be in the middle of a public place or out in the middle of a crowd and feel absolutely disconnected and feel absolutely alone. And there was no text, there was no, as I said, there were no graphs, no statistics. It was there simply to enhance the emotional power of what she was saying and to help you try to understand what sufferers must feel like. And it was just it was this fantastic slide. The old adage, a picture tells 1,000 words, is absolutely true. And you don't want to pack your slide with 1,000 words. Text-heavy slides, graph-heavy slides will only distract the viewer. The minute someone sees a slide with lots of writing, lots of dense information, they stop looking at you and they stop listening to what you're saying and they start reading the slide. They start looking at the slide. So as I said, it's not to say you can't do those things. And in fact, you can use a bit of everything. You could have a picture on one side of your slide and you could have a small graph or infographic on the other. And people do it and sometimes do it really well. So I shouldn't say never do it. But I suppose what I'm saying is have a think about what kind of visual accompaniment best suits the tone, the content, the research you're doing. Think about the emotion you want to convey and not just conveying facts. Because facts and statistics and things can sway an audience, but this is the sort of competition where you will sway them far more by appealing to an emotional core. Do you want people to be terrified by, if you're doing research in health and medicine, do you want to convey a sense of terror of this awful disease that you're trying to overcome? So there's this sense of, this research is so important because this disease is terrible. Do you want people to think in a different way about something that might have seemed quite humdrum or ordinary? And can humor in a slide do that? One of the talks, unfortunately, I didn't get to slip into today's presentation just because there's not enough time, is a video submission from an Italian student at Monash University, well worth Googling, who is doing research into how to improve solar panels, the building materials, the way they're treated and so on, so that solar panels don't degrade as much over time, have better output, have a longer life and so on. He uses this really fun analogy through his speech of the Three Little Pigs. Uses a fairy tale that everyone knows. And he talks about how the Three Little Pigs all now, in the 21st century, don't live in houses of stick or, straw anymore. Now they all have beautiful brick houses, but now they're worried about, they're not worried about the wolf anymore. Now they're worried about climate change. Now that, And he has this slide, which is this fun little sort of fairy tale image of these three pigs in their coloured houses with their solar panels on top, showing how each, one is, one of them might be poorly built, a solar panel, one might be a better, And he uses this sort of recurring joke about the three little pigs with their solar panels. So as I said, the tone of your slide really should match the tone of your presentation. It is there to enhance the emotional impact, the rhetorical devices you're using. And finally, the presenter conveyed enthusiasm for their research and captured and maintained the audience's attention. Again, that's quite a broad statement. How you convey enthusiasm will be quite individual to you. How you capture and maintain your audience's attention will also be quite individual to you, but there are a couple of elements worth considering. Most good presentations will start with some kind of hook or opener. So again, a common one is that hypothetical, imagine you're doing this, but not necessarily. Some of them might, as I said, lay out some of the kind of scenarios, some of them might, but broadly speaking, the most impactful words you speak, the portions of your speech that will remain with the viewer the most when they're finished are the first words and the final words, the beginning and the end. It's quite helpful if you can make your summary, your final statement, tie back into your opening statement. And you'll see most of the videos we look at shortly will have some kind of closing statement that alludes to or comes back to the first image at the beginning. It creates this really beautiful sense of completion. It helps remind the viewer of where they began. It's this really nice cyclical effect it creates. So as I said, that's one fairly safe element that you can employ. Beyond that, though, as I said, the other devices you use will come down to what works best for you. Any questions about the criteria before we move on? Fantastic. Okay, eligibility and prizes. I won't spend too long on this because some of these details are still coming through from the university level, but as I said earlier, any master's or PhD research student can compete at, that should be college, sorry, / university levels. So regardless of what the tournament organisers at UQ have said, this university absolutely allows you to compete as long as you are a master's or PhD research student at any stage in your candidature. And as we've discussed, I would absolutely encourage everyone to do so. However, only confirmed PhD candidates can progress to the Asia Pacific finals. It doesn't happen too often, but what would happen in a scenario if you at your university finals, if they awarded first, second, and third place, and then it turns out that the winners of first and second place were not confirmed or were not PhD level, they would still, as I said, get all the other benefits that get their prizes. It simply means that the university would select the third place winner, being the highest place winner who is confirmed, to go through to the Asia Pacific final. I haven't seen it happen all that often, but as I said, that's what would happen in that scenario. The schools themselves are still finalising some of their prizes, but at the university final level, the prizes are the same as they were last year. So first, second, and third place with $5,000, $2,000, and $1,000 prizes respectively. Although those prizes are just for research-related expenses. So unfortunately, they don't just cut you a giant check. You saw in Dr. Rossi's video, she had that big check. Or they might give you one as a prop when they take your photo, but the expenses are just for, or the money, sorry, are just for expenses related to your research. There will also be a People's Choice Award. The precise value of that award is still being finalised. In years previous, when it was a live competition, the audience all basically got their own little ballot and got to vote for their favourite. So it's fantastic that the audience could also select their favourites and not just the judges. How the People's Choice Award is awarded this year will obviously be a little different because it's a digital, video submission contest. UQ have actually suggested that they use things like Facebook likes and so on as a way of indicating it. I'm not sure yet how it will be awarded, but the audience themselves will have a chance to have their say. Okay. So let's look at actually how we might prepare for this. Now, I will quickly say that a lot of the advice you're going to see over the next few slides is going to seem very common sense. It's going to seem like very universal, obvious advice. The tricky thing is there is no magic bullet advice I can give you for this competition. I can't say to you, if you start your speech with this phrase, or if you include these words, or if you do this very specific thing with your hands, that you are, guaranteed to win. Because as you'll see, winning speeches take on 1,000 different forms. They are very much personal to the people who deliver them. So this advice is more about just helping you put together a draft, helping you, I guess, narrow down the elements and the approaches that you think suit you best. Because as I said, that authenticity is really the best thing you can bring out in your speech. The first thing here, for the love of God, do not try and ad-lib your speech. This is as much good advice for the video submission contest as it was years ago for the live performance. Yeah, in fact, in previous years, I did see a handful of students, not many, who said to themselves, well, no one in the world understands my specific research better than I do. So surely if I want to give a speech that is moving and heartfelt and sways my audience, surely I should just go out there and speak from the heart. And that is a terribly romantic idea. It's wonderful in theory. And if you are a master public speaker, you might even pull it off. But I can tell you that more often than not, when in the moment, when you're trying to deliver it, and in this case, obviously deliver it to a camera, and the camera is merciless and staring you down and the seconds are ticking, the odds of just pulling out the perfect speech pre-formed from the back of your head are virtually nil. It's a very, very rare skill to have. More often than not, you'll get 2 minutes in even and think you're going really well. But all it takes is one moment where you just can't think of what to say next. You get a bit tongue-tied, and suddenly that whole take is gone. That whole speech is worthless to you. So that whole take, I should say, is worthless to you. So what I would absolutely encourage you to do is sit down and draft this thing. Write it out. Write some big, grandiose, terrible drafts, and then sift through them, pull out the bits you like, make a new draft. It's a process. Woodshed it and refine it until you know what you're going to say and you are happy with everything you're going to say. In fact, don't even just confine yourself to drafting your words. Think about even loosely choreographing some things you might do with your body or your hands. So you don't have to choreograph every second of it, but through your draft, you might say, on this point, on this sentence here, when I say there are 3 things I want to tell you, you might sort of pull a little, side note that says, hold up 3 fingers and then sort of hold up finger 1, hold up finger 2. You'll see that when people present to their camera, in the videos we'll see, they have some very specific hand gestures, and some have some really incredible things they do to help visually enhance, I guess, what it is they're saying. There's nothing in the rules about gesticulations being gimmickry. Your body is a tool you are absolutely allowed to use. So, as I said, when you're drafting your speech, think about what your stance is doing, think about your facial expression, think about your tone of voice. Think about all of these other elements and how they will accompany and work with the words you've written. When writing a draft, avoid jargon and academic language. Now, we've mentioned this already, but as I said, avoid it if it can be discarded safely. If it is something that's key to your research, though, don't leave it out, obviously. Just find a way to reframe it, find an analogy to describe it, find a way to sort of unpack that term or that concept so that a non-specialist audience can still easily understand it. Again, consider the why. Why is this research important to me and to the world? Those are both really important questions to answer. Answering one might obviously flow onto answering the other. Tell a story with an opener, hook, series of points, and summary to finish. Again, I spoke a little bit about this, but it's hard to define exactly what it looks like to turn your speech into a narrative, because again, it's very specific to you. But the idea is there should be a natural flow of ideas. That there, as I said, the order you would choose to answer your questions in, the how, what, and why, or all of them at once, or all mixed up, it should feel like you're telling a story. Here is a problem. This is where my research comes in. This is how I'm going to go about it, and this is why it's really important. Or another, process. Have you ever considered what it looks like to do this weird thing in a lab? Well, this is what I do, and sort of in that sense, then your story might start with the how. But the idea is it should feel like you were telling someone a story. There should be a sense of logical narrative. Aim for a length of about 2 minutes 45 to give yourself breathing room. This is something I mentioned at the beginning. There is no rule that states a minimum length for your speech. Now, again, it will be extraordinarily hard if you try to bring your speech down to 2 minutes, and there's really no purpose to doing that. But I think about 2 minutes 45, look, even give or take 5 seconds, 2 minutes 40, 2 minutes 50, I think is a good length to aim for a couple of reasons. Obviously, this is no longer a live performance competition, so you don't have to worry about looking at a ticking clock on stage and panicking that you're running out of time. That's not so much an issue anymore. However, when you give yourself a little breathing room, you give yourself a surplus of time, and time is an extraordinarily useful currency. What you can do with time in between the words is phenomenal. So, for example, if I am talking about, again, some horrific illness that I'm trying to treat with my research, I might deliver to the camera a really damning statistic or really damning scenario. I might say, consider that in your lifetime, 3 people will die of this, this awful, degenerative disease or whatever it might be. And I've said, imagine that, this many people will die in your lifetime. And just a few seconds of just staring down the camera and letting those words resonate, letting them have this enormous weight is extraordinarily powerful. When you're watching someone talk quite a lot about what they're doing and suddenly there's just a moment of silence where they just look at you. Suddenly it sort of draws you back to yourself and your own reaction. It sort of pulls you into it, creates this connection, even through a camera. It's quite a powerful technique. So think about even where you might want to put in some strategic pauses into your speech. Think about where you might want to just take a breath. So if you've got a paragraph, or if you're talking about your methodology, and you say, well, first we put it into the lab and then we put it through this machine, and then we do this, and then we do this, and just even having a couple of little breaths to break up a long sentence or to break up several steps just helps your viewer keep up with you and not feel like they're suddenly getting inundated with jargon information they can't follow. So as I said, having that extra, 10, 15 seconds of time distributed across the 3 minutes to just give you some breaths, give you a chance to sort of let certain words sit with the viewer is a really powerful tool. I know it's tempting sometimes to think, I've got so much information I want to share and I've only got 3 minutes. I feel like I should just pack as much into every second of that time as I can. But the problem is when you sort of cram it in like that, the first thing that happens is your rate of speech goes up. So suddenly you're talking very quickly because you've got all this information you want to share and you've only got 3 minutes and oh my God, there's so much I want to tell you. But the problem is you get to the end of the 3 minutes and the other person thinks, look, I didn't pick up a word of that. This person rambled and I just couldn't follow. You rob yourself of so much emotional impact. So as I said, think about time. And don't feel like you've got to get as close to 3 minutes as possible. It's perfectly fine to have a few extra seconds up your sleeve and to make use of them. Watch previous winners online, both video submissions and live performances. Obviously, we're going to look at a few together now. We are lucky, I suppose, that because this is the second year it's been a digital competition, there are now a wealth of video submitted 3MT performances that you can watch online from a range of universities, backgrounds, disciplines, styles. However, I would say don't just look at video submissions. There are some excellent techniques you learn from watching live performance that still translate just as powerfully into a presentation, to a camera. So don't limit yourself just to looking at other video presentations. And as I said, this competition has been running for many, many years now, since 2008. So there's just so many other great performances you can look at. Again, there are so many, in fact, that you can specify your search to people from your own field of research. You might search out presenters that seem to have a similar presentation style or personality to you that's being conveyed. Look for the ones that are useful to you, discard the ones that aren't. As you'll see from the videos we're going to watch today, this sort of competition is quite subjective. So even though that particular person, won their university final with that presentation, it's all right if you hate it. It's all right if you say, look, I can see what they're doing, but that style just doesn't really resonate with me. If it doesn't resonate with you, then you probably won't want to do the things they're doing. You can pull out different elements from different speeches. So you can be quite discerning, and you don't have to love everything you see in speeches that were quite successful in their own competitions. Practice, 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 practice. You know, it's the rule of life for pretty much everything, really. And practice, I put here in the mirror, but I would also say practice even just filming a few seconds of yourself. So if you don't even have to have set up the room the way you want to set it up yet. But when you're first drafting your speech, you know, put on your webcam, put on your smartphone camera, and record 10 seconds and watch it back and say, okay, this is how I think I sound, and this is how I think I look. But what do I actually sound like? What do I actually look like? This technique that seems like it's quite effective in my delivery here, how does it actually appear to the audience? The camera is a merciless observer. It will show you absolutely what it sees. It's not going to sugarcoat anything. So if something isn't working, you'll pretty quickly figure it out when you watch it back. But also, as I put here, practice with other people. So, you know, your supervisor, colleagues, friends, pets, anyone and everyone. As I said before, it's the easiest way to determine if your speech is compelling, if it has a clear narrative, if it tells a story, if it contains any jargon or technical terms or concepts that are going to be problematic. And I've put here as well, practice especially if your speech includes humour. Humour can be a very effective tool in the right context. So obviously, if your research suits it and your style of delivery suits some humour, then you can use it to great effect. But it should be used carefully because it is very subjective. So what you think is a hilarious joke, if you tell that to some other people, you know, when you're practicing, and they say to you, oh, it's either A, unfunny, or B, kind of in poor taste, or C, doesn't really fit the tone of your speech because you're talking about something really serious, and then you try to inject this weird joke about something which just sort of doesn't seem like you know, it's important to pick that up early, because humor can sort of, you know, fall on an audience very, very well or fall on them very, very badly. So as I said, use it if it suits, by all means, but test it out. I will say at this point, and it's something I'm even feeling right now as I deliver this, there is a singular challenge in presenting to a camera that gives you no human feedback. Live performance can be quite frightening. It's in fact one of the most common anxieties we have as a species, according to most studies. But in a funny way, when you're on stage talking to an audience, you give out and you receive in return a sort of energy that electrifies you. It lifts your performance. I can tell you from experience, when you say something to an audience and there's a really enthusiastic response, someone laughs, or there's a gasp or whatever it might be, or even just looking at the expressions on people's faces, and you can see that they're really invested in what you're saying. It buoys you, it lifts you, it infuses the thing you say next. And there is a really direct relationship. While this competition takes out the anxiety, I suppose, of speaking live in front of an audience, it is hard when you're trying to convey emotion at a machine that is not giving you anything in return, and never will. It's just an eye. And so it's something that you do actually have to practice quite a bit. You have to sort of practice at the camera until you can emulate as much as possible that same human energy, even though you're not receiving anything in return. You have to trust that your viewer, when the time comes that they're watching, you know, your video, are going to have all of those same responses that you would see in a live audience. So, as I said, it is just a challenge that you may discover if you haven't discovered already. It's actually not as easy to present the same speech to a camera as it is to an audience, because, as I said, it's like talking into the void, basically. Present company excluded, of course. You're all lovely people. You're not a void, but as I said, it's a very different flavour, very, very different flavour. So it is something to practice. When practicing, consider your rate of speech, stance, body language, gesticulation, tone and pitch. Be authentic. Again, these are things we've talked about in various ways. Stance, body language, and gesticulation. It is worth mentioning at this point that the camera is going to capture you from the top of your head, or just above the top of your head, down to about your waist. So it's not going to capture your legs. Obviously, you're not going to be walking around while you present. In a live 3MT performance, you are actually able to move around the stage a bit and kind of work the audience. Here, though, it is important that you stay more or less rooted to the spot, particularly if you're going to have your slide appear beside you when you cut it in later, because if you step too far to the side, suddenly when you cut your slide in, you're cutting off half your face. So You have to make sure then that all of your body language is conveyed through your upper body. So a good rule of thumb in terms of stance and posture is, and I don't know if this recording's picking up my webcam at the moment, I might actually very quickly just stop sharing the slides. Can you all see me now? Let's see if I can do this. Sorry, this camera's not a very good height, unfortunately. Let me move back a bit. Okay. I'm trying to keep my hands at a fairly neutral level. So I've got my arms sort of sitting fairly comfortably by my sides, but I don't have my arms straight. If you stand on the spot with your arms by your sides, you look kind of awkward. You look a bit like a soldier standing to attention. So what you want is to bend your elbows a bit and let your hands sort of float, let them drift a bit around your belly button almost. This does a couple of things. The first thing it does is open up your chest and open up your body language. It makes your posture quite approachable, quite inviting to the viewer. It's very different, for example, than say crossing your arms, which is a very closed posture. So it sort of means that your chest and your body is visible. But more importantly, with your hands sort of floating in this neutral position, it creates this canvas in all of this space around you where your hands can then move out and gesticulate. So as I said, if I want to say I've got 3 things to show you, 1, 2, 3, or if I want to, this thing has been on the rise, or this thing has been on the decline, or this is great news, or whatever it might be. You've got this sort of space to comfortably move your arms around without going crazy, but then when you want to, you can then sort of just bring them back to this neutral position. So as I said, that you'll see a lot of presenters do this, where they sort of do a bit with their hands, but then bring them back to this sort of neutral position. It's not the only way you can approach this, obviously. And what you do with your body can be quite distinct to your own performance. You can do all kinds of things. But it is a good sort of template to start with. It just means that if you want to, put in some body language, it's a good neutral position to give yourself. Right here, I'll quickly just bring my slides back up. Let's find where I was. Beautiful. So yes, when it talks about body language and so on, those are things to consider. How do you appear to the viewer? And again, if you do a couple of quick recordings and look back, you'll very quickly spot any troublesome elements that you've put in there. And finally, check out other online resources for presentation techniques. Don't limit yourself just to other 3MT talks. There are plenty of other great performances, both to camera and to an audience out there. TED Talks are a great one. I'm sure most of us have probably seen a TED Talk before, or several. I love watching TED Talks by scientists and academics who are doing really crazy cutting edge, high concept stuff. I love watching them give TED Talks because they're talking to a universal audience, and they're not talking so much like they would in a lab or at a conference. They're talking as excited people who have a passion for something really cool they're doing. So TED Talks are very much like 3MT presentations. They are an attempt to humanize and build connection with an audience around research or around interesting things that are happening. So they're a really great resource to look at. And instructional websites. Now that this is a video submission contest, there are a ton of guides out there made by vloggers, Insta-famous people, far more Insta-famous than you and I, who have put up tutorials on how to record in a room with great audio and video, how to present to a camera really comfortably. On a slide that you're about to see, I've got a link that you can look at later, I won't play it now, of a woman who's made this great little video on how to use natural lighting or found light sources like lamps and things around your house to create really good lighting when you're recording a video of yourself. So there are all sorts of resources, even on the recording and editing stages. If you've never had to record yourself like this or edit video, yeah, jump online and see what resources are available. Okay, so let's go. I won't labor these too much again because they're a little bit paint by numbers, but we'll look a little bit at some advice around the actual recording side. I should also say that a lot of the advice I've got on these slides comes directly from the 3MT official handbook from the University of Queensland. That is available as a PDF online, and I have put the link to that on the final slide. So if you want to see a lot of this stuff from the horse's mouth, that handbook is a really great resource. I definitely recommend reading through. Recording options. Now again, you can record with anything you want. This is just a very broad overview of some sources, some recording devices that most of us would have, or at least one of these, hopefully, in our house. So obviously you've got digital cameras, handheld video recorders, and so on. Webcam, obviously, and if you are using webcam on a Windows computer, you've got apps that can record, your camera app. Windows Movie Maker, if you have a slightly older Windows computer, unfortunately they removed it in the newer software, so newer Windows computers won't have that. A Mac, of course, is very much a video machine. It's got iMovie, Final Cut Pro, QuickTime Player, Photo Booth. If you're using a Mac, I don't mind telling you, you'll have more options. They're very much multimedia machines. But Windows and Mac should both have some options for you to use. Most of us will probably use our smartphone camera. You know, almost every phone today has a recording option, and that's absolutely fine. Or you can use your iPad or tablet. And as I said, you can also use Zoom. Just make sure you maintain a plain background, but you can open up a Zoom conference of one and just get yourself in there and record a few takes and so on. In terms of lighting, again, these are just some basic tips, but it's one of those things, play around with the space you have. We all have different houses, offices, rooms available to us. So we're going to have to, you know, create the best space we have with the materials available. If you can, record yourself in a well-lit room, and natural light is best. As you'll see on the right, the angle of the lighting is also really important. So the light needs to face you, it needs to shine onto you. If light is shining from behind you, the first thing it will do is darken your silhouette. So you absolutely want to make sure that whatever your light source, it is shining directly onto you. So again, they've put it there, light sources, for example, windows should face you. Additional lighting will further improve the quality of your video. Look for desk lamps, torches, or the camera flash on your smartphone. So again, you can play with these and you can set them up around the room. The link I've put down there to that video I mentioned that the woman's made, she makes an interesting point as well that you can experiment with either having a light source shine directly onto you, or if it's more of a standing or desk lamp that sort of casts a sort of beam of light, you can actually tilt it towards a nearby wall and experiment with having the light sort of bounce off the wall onto you, because that can often help soften and diffuse light. So again, the point of this slide is really play around with the light sources in the space you're going to record. Record a few takes and see which take you look best in. It should look very natural. You should look, you know, like you've got the correct sort of coloration. Hopefully you won't have like weird shadows on your face. Hopefully you won't be too blanched. You want something that is fairly natural. In terms of sound, record in a quiet environment where sound can be controlled, for example, in a small closed room. Obviously, we don't always have, you know, soundproof rooms available to us, but yeah, wherever possible, somewhere that is smaller and enclosed. Obviously, the risk with larger spaces or with tiled spaces is that you'll get an echo and things like that. So you want something that's got plenty of sound dampening so that the sound's pretty natural. Turn off noisy electronics. This is a really interesting one because I think most of us who spend all day, you know, in front of our computer or maybe next to our air conditioner or radiator, our brain learns to tune out constant, repetitive, humming, buzzing sounds. So after a while, we're not even entirely aware that sound is being produced. But when you record in a space like that and play it back, you will absolutely notice if there is a tinny sort of humming sound or a buzzing sound or something interrupting your talk. So what they're saying there is any electronics you do not need, switch them off, dampen them, whatever it is, to dial out any kind of interference. Try to anticipate outside interruptions at certain times of day, for example, cars or lawnmowers, so, you know, peak hour traffic, whatever it might be. Consider filming during a quieter time of day. So you might find that, you know, later in the evening or early in the morning, depending on the day, you know, things are pretty quiet outside. Even considering what times of day you tend to get a lot of, you know, bird song, things like that. It's good sort of just being a bit strategic about it so you get the quietest possible environment. If there are any audio interruptions during your recording, do not continue. Stop and try again at a later point. So again, don't keep banging your head against a wall if it's not working. Come back, try again later. These are things that are quite useful to consider simply because if you do a really good recording, if you look through and say, I love that take I did, but there's some ambient noise interference, the lighting's not great. The problem is, you know, you might be able to, depending on your skills, use some kind of video editing program to sort of, you know, fix the light a little bit or dial out the ambient sound. But the more post-production stuff you have to do, the more it's going to feel artificial. So for example, iMovie is one example. It has like a very simple tool where it can try and dial out ambient sound that's not meant to be there. The problem is when you start, sliding that bar up and dialing it out, the sound that should be there, your voice, starts to sound a bit tinny, starts to sound a bit weird because it's sort of pulling out bits of sound frequencies that you really don't want it pulling out. So it's much better to have recorded it well in the first place and then really not have to touch up anything at all afterwards. You really want to avoid giving yourself a headache with any kind of post-production, especially if, as I said, you don't really have the skills or the tools to do that. But what you can control more is the conditions under which you record it in the first place. So now, I mentioned earlier that there are different ways you can frame your shot. It actually has, UQ have provided some diagrams to show this. So aim for a clean, plain wall as your background, completely free of visual distractions from the waist up where you'll be framing your shot. And we can see the two options here again. So the one on the left with you in the center is if you intend to use a cutaway effect for your slide, so to cut to your slide and then cut back to you. The one on the right is if you intend to have the slide beside you at all times. Again, there's no right or wrong. I suppose procedurally, the one on the right is probably easier to achieve because you don't have to worry. Cutaways and things can get a bit messy sometimes because then you've got to think to yourself, well, when am I cutting to it? When am I cutting back? Cutaways are probably also a bit more useful if you're going to refer to your slide directly. So something I didn't mention earlier, but it is worth mentioning now, is it is entirely up to you the degree to which you refer to your 3-minute thesis slide. So the slide can be beside you and you don't even have to acknowledge it at all while you're talking. You can just give your speech to the camera and trust that what's on the slide is quite self-explanatory and people can immediately see how it relates to what you're saying. Or if you want to, you can actually during your speech say, if you look at my slide here, this is what I'm talking about. Like, this sort of thing happens, or this is, my slide shows this. That's absolutely acceptable as well. The speeches we're about to see, you'll see that there are some people who don't refer at all, and there are some people at the other extreme who make their slide the foundation of their entire speech. So it is, as I said, I mention it here because if you're going to refer to your slide, it's a bit weird sometimes to sort of hold your hands up like you're showing off a car at a dealership. I think if you're going to refer to specific things on your slide, then a cutaway effect might be more useful. You can say, as you see on my slide, and then the camera sort of cuts to the slide, and then when you're done talking about it, it cuts back to you. If, however, the slide is there, but it's sort of it's self-explanatory and you're not having to say too much about it, you might find the picture-in-picture is easier for you because then you just know it's sitting beside you at all times and you can just give your speech. So as I said, play around a bit, see which one you prefer, but this is how you'd frame it. Again, if you're recording on a digital device, obviously make sure there's enough storage on the phone or iPad to actually save the video you're recording, because for high quality phones, 3 minutes of footage can actually be a fairly sizable file. Make sure your phone is in airplane mode so that it doesn't receive texts or calls or beep or things while you're presenting. I think my computer's been beeping a little bit while I've been presenting. Make sure your device is fully charged, obviously, so you don't run out of battery halfway through the perfect take. And make sure it's held stable. So remember that one of the rules is that you have to have a single camera angle and the camera must be completely immobile. The camera can't pan or move, intentionally or otherwise. So make sure that if you're using a laptop, it's sitting on a flat surface and facing you. If you're using your phone, make sure it's propped up on something. I don't know if you can see it on the again. I might just quickly cut to myself. Sorry. Just to quickly show a bit of show and tell. This is something I got during lockdown for NUPSA, the previous association, when we were doing a lot of video content. It's like a little tripod thing with little octopus legs that you can bend and fold and wrap around things. And basically it's got a little vise in here that your phone goes in, and you can tilt your phone at any angle. You can wrap it around a pole and have it on a wall. It just means your camera can have any angle or height and be completely still. These are more and more accessible these days price-wise, but you don't have to get something like this, certainly. It's just, as I said, think about some ways you can make sure your recording device is absolutely still. You can just tap record, step in front of it, frame your shot, and deliver your speech. Just quickly find my slides again. Oh, hang on. Beautiful. Remember to film in horizontal. So again, because you're framing your speech this way and because your slide will be inserted here and so on, it's really important you're in landscape, you're in horizontal. It's not mentioned on these slides, but UQ have suggested the best ratio to use, and the ratio that most camera phones do use is 16:9. So your sort of cinematic widescreen. So if you have a choice of a ratio, that's what I would go with. And by extension, I would use that same ratio for your things like your title slide and your PowerPoint slide, because if everything is the same ratio, it becomes very easy when you're doing the video editing to put in your picture-in-picture or to put in your cutaways. It means nothing gets cropped or cut off the edges. And finally, camera should be at eye level. You really want to make sure your camera is not looking down or up at you, because those create very weird specific effects in terms of the psychology of the viewer and so on. You want it to emulate as if you're standing in front of someone talking. So whatever device you use, as best you can, make sure the camera is facing you directly at eye level. And then it's also much easier for you to look straight ahead at the camera. It means you don't have to sort of weirdly look down or look up and tilt your head and do weird things. Something I forgot to mention earlier is, and it's kind of hard to do, during your speech, as much as you can, keep your gaze trained absolutely on the camera that's facing you. When you're presenting live, there's a bit of a rule of thumb where as you move around a stage and talk to an audience, you generally try to make eye contact with everyone in the audience at least once during your speech. And, you sort of divvy up your eye contact a bit so that everyone gets a chance to look directly at you while you're talking at them. That's generally what you do with a presentation like that. Here, you really only have one participant, which is the camera. Every single viewer is the camera. And when the camera is focused on you quite intently, as cameras are, I can tell you now from experience that the minute your gaze flits anywhere but the camera, the minute you look over into the corner of the room or look slightly above the camera or below the camera or beside the camera, it's quite noticeable to the viewer. It looks like something else has caught your eye. It looks like you've become distracted by something because they're really focusing on your face. With a live performance of 3MT, the distance between you and the audience is much longer, so it's harder for them really to look that closely. But here, the camera's going to pick you up quite closely. So as I said, it's tricky, it takes some practice, but as much as you can, try and just keep your gaze on the camera when you're talking, because you are therefore presenting directly eye to eye with every single viewer, with the whole world. And again, we've looked at this already, but it sort of just outlines the two different framing options. So option one, if using a cutaway, you're in the center of the frame, not being cut off at the top, so you can be seen from the waist up. Ensure there is equal space and just the blank wall background on either side of you. So you're right in the center, and the top of your head, if possible, is not cut off. Option two, you're left of the center of the frame without being cut off, and the right side will be your video, sorry, your slide. One quick thing to bear in mind, just to save yourself having to flip the image in post-production, remember that your right is the camera's left. So to the camera, you're going to be standing on the left side with the image to the right of you, which means when you're facing the camera, you're going to take a step to the right, not a step to the left. You'll quickly pick that up when you watch the footage back anyway, but it is worth considering. Other recording tips: ensure your device is able to autofocus on you for the full duration. Shouldn't be much of an issue if you and the camera are both immobile, if you're both maintaining the same distance for the 3 minutes. But if you have a particular camera that's always trying to find the image it's focusing on, finding the subject, you want to make sure it stays on you. Otherwise, you'll suddenly become blurry and suddenly become sharp. And ensure your recording device isn't too far away from you. The microphone should be as close to you as possible while achieving the necessary framing. So again, for most of us who don't have studio setups, we're probably going to be recording sound and video with the same device. So you want to strike a balance between having the camera at the right distance to you, but also having the microphone at a distance where it can comfortably hear you speak, hear you present. It's why when you do a couple of practice recordings, you want to listen for the volume, you want to listen for how it's picking up your voice. This one I just mentioned, be aware of eye movement, maintain eye contact with the camera lens as though they were a person in the audience watching you present live. Again, for all the reasons we discussed. Title slide. Now, here's an example I knocked together, but again, you've got some options here. Remember that the point of this competition is to avoid gimmickry. I, in fact, have probably danced with the devil a bit here by putting in some geometric shapes and dots for interest. You're probably safer even just making a blank image with just your name, your school, college, and the name of your presentation. But the point I'm making here is you will create a slide with this information, and in post-production, you will put it at the very start of your video, and it will cut from this title slide directly to you, and then a few seconds later, you'll start talking. In terms of exactly what must go on here in terms of written information, there are a couple of things that there are pretty safe assumptions for the competition, like your name, your title, your school or college. However, if your school or the university asks you to include other information, make sure you include that as well. So just see what they want you to include, essentially. As I said before, the point of this is so that you yourself don't have to introduce yourself when you start talking. The marker or the viewer will already know exactly who you are. They'll know what your research discipline is, and they'll know, maybe even from your title, a little bit about what it is you're going to be talking about. Yeah, I've mentioned canva.com. If you want to make something that is not too gaudy, but pleasing and just a little bit interesting, but as I said, still tournament ready, canva.com is a fantastic platform. It's free. You can go in there and use templates. I think this was a template I just pulled out and just changed the text. I don't think I changed anything about the design. And it's a way to quickly knock together something that looks kind of nice, but isn't going to take you hours of work if you're not a graphic designer. Sometimes when you get to the university final level, they actually make their own title slides for all their competitors. So in fact, some of the videos we're just about to see, you'll notice their title slides tend to break these rules a bit, but that's because the university itself has actually created them for their competition. Okay. We are getting into the tail end of this now, so let's start to put all of these elements together and see what some of these presentations actually look like. So I have selected a combination of video presentations and live performances. I think it is still good to see certain live performances, but as I said, these should hopefully give you an idea of what this looks like in practice. For each one, I have a link. As we did with the Megan Rossi video, I'm going to drop the link in. I'll give you about 3 minutes, obviously, to watch the video. And then I'll get you to put your hand up again when you're finished, and we'll have a quick chat, and we'll move on to the next one. For each video, oh, sorry, there's a question there. Just quickly check. Do you make a new title or use your thesis title? Oh, it's a very good question. Sorry, that's a good question. Your 3MT speech should have a title, and I would recommend you do not use the same title you use for your thesis. Obviously, it will vary discipline to discipline, but in my experience, and probably in yours, thesis titles are very, very long and very, very sciencey. Extracting the something protein using something method under something clinical conditions, X, Y, Z, Q to the power of something, because thesis titles have to be quite precise, as you know. Unfortunately, they're not very sexy or fun or emotional, so you can make your 3MT title very short or very long. You can make it a bit of a first clause, second clause thing like I've done there. But I would recommend you try and, like you're doing with your speech, try and make your 3MT title a bit more human, a bit more attention grabbing to a general audience than your thesis title. The title is not so much about accuracy, it's more about, as I said, creating a sense of tone, a sense of theme. You'll see the thesis, you'll see the 3MT titles of the videos you're about to watch. You'll see those very clearly aren't their actual thesis titles. They're designed to be a little bit more interesting to the viewer. So to answer to answer your question, yes, you would make up a new title and you would have a slightly different approach than you would with your thesis. Now, for each of these videos, I've put here a broad list of things you might consider in watching them, but to be honest, I would consider everything about these presentations, not just their body language, not just their tone. Look at these different elements and look at how they fit together in practice. So the first is Juliana Guy from Purdue University. She was one of last year's video submission winners. So I'm going to drop the link to Juliana's video into text chat. I'm going to go dark for a few minutes, and as I said, I'll get you to watch through it and then raise your hand and we'll have a little bit of a chat. So there's the link. Okay, got a few people finished, a few more coming in. Fantastic. So I'll get you, if you can, to maybe write down some of your thoughts about this, but also something to think about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, is did that feel like a 3-minute speech? Did that feel like 3 minutes, the video you watched? Did it feel shorter? Did it feel longer? Okay, so someone said quite captivating and it felt shorter than 3 minutes. I always love asking that question about time because, as I said before, time is it can be quite elastic and it can be quite subjective. 3 minutes feels like a very short time, but you can actually you can take the viewer on quite a journey in 3 minutes. I think, as I said, while you're putting in your comments there, I'll just say a few other things. I think it's interesting to note, again, the order in which she addressed those questions. So it's clear that she started with the why. She presented a situation, an experience she'd had that was actually quite concerning, quite demoralizing, and she gave some pretty damning statistics. So someone's put, yes, definitely flew right past, did get bogged down with not understanding any constructs and followed easily the whole time. Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. She was very careful not to get caught up in, that's all right, did not get caught up. She was very careful to avoid getting caught up in high science. She spoke in very human terms. In fact, she placed great emphasis on the qualities coming out of her research around compassion, resilience, gratitude. Even though obviously she's working in the field of engineering, she's working in STEM, she's presenting her project as something very human. It's interesting to note that saying what her project was, she didn't really even introduce that until about halfway through. She took great time first to lay out this very bleak picture of engineering students. And then she stepped in with the what and said, my research is this, and this is how, this is what it's designed to assist with. And then she sort of went straight into the how and said, this is how I did it. And again, she didn't sort of tell you anything more than you had to know about the how. So she said, what'd you say? I've interviewing thousands of people from students to professors to deans. I put together a course. But beyond that, as I said, in terms of the process of how that data was collected or anything like that, that is not stuff that the audience needs to know. It is enough to just say that, she spoke with lots of people about their experiences, and then she took that feedback and created something that they could engage with. Her energy, I like, again, it'd be interesting to see your thoughts on this too, the way she conveyed enthusiasm. So she was quite sort of, I felt like this was very much her personality on and off camera. So she was quite bubbly and quite sort of excited about the work she was doing. Her body language sort of played into that as well. So you'll see that her hands were sort of coming up and sort of emphasizing certain words. She did a really interesting thing at the beginning when she imitated her engineering lecturer and sort of put on the voice and said, look to your left, look to your right, with a very stern pointing and things. All of that is entirely admissible within the rules. That is not, poetry, rap or song. That is not a prop. Your body, you can do imitations, you can do little comic bits. That's all absolutely fine. So yeah, as you said, taking it apart, you can see quite a few of the elements we spoke about all coming together to create a particular energy, a particular sort of tone to her speech. Her slide as well was not fact heavy. It was comic. It's a humorous image designed to show, obviously, how people come in one end quite bright and ready to learn and come out the other end exhausted and demoralized. So again, it's just a good example of how your slide can convey an emotion rather than just information. I am conscious of time, so we'll move on. Our next presentation is from Sophia Shah from the University of Calgary. She was another finalist from last year. Now, again, pay no attention to the fact that her title slide is sort of superimposed over her slide and her talk. That's something the university itself will have done. Remember that your title slide should go first and be separate, and that your slide should be to the right of you. So yeah, as I said, you'll see some variances with these, but pay no mind to that. So I'll drop a link in. Again, I'll go dark if you guys want to watch that through, and then raise your hand. Okay, it looks like a few of you have got to the end there. That's all right if you need a few more seconds, that's fine. Again, what did we make of Sophia's talk? Different discipline, different tone she adopts throughout. Did you think it was effective? Did you think, was there anything in there that you think wasn't clearly described? Again, I mentioned this earlier in my talk. She uses that really interesting analogy of blank tiles for something like stem cells. So it's that use of analogy to better explain potentially troublesome concepts. She does mention a couple of terms that she doesn't explain. Absolutely. So she talks about, so someone's mentioned nice occasional references to the spine and back throughout. She gives some pretty damning statistics about how many people are going to be hospitalized or often or also will need to have surgery for a spinal or back injury throughout their lives. So she does that, I think, so that to emphasize to all of us that even if we haven't ever had to have spinal surgery ourselves, actually there's a fair statistical likelihood that it's something, you know, that we'll have to do at some point. So I think that really emphasizes the why. It's to really hammer in that, you know, this is important research for every one of us because so many of us are going to go under the knife for this kind of thing. So again, it's another way of emphasizing the why. Absolutely. So managed to convey a lot of interesting info, but it still didn't feel rushed. Yeah. I like her rate of speech. It's very controlled throughout, but you're right, because she's timed it carefully and she's practiced her speech to be the right length, she's able to sort of conversationally outlay a lot of information without ever feeling like she's rushing through anything. Her tone is obviously very well practiced and quite measured. She also pays close attention to her diction. So when you're talking at length about something, and particularly if you're concerned that you're going to be talking a little faster, one way to ensure that every word is captured and heard and that words don't get glossed over or rolled together is thinking very carefully about your diction. So pronouncing all of your T's and D's. So you'll notice that certain words that end in a D, that, you know, the D is very clearly enunciated, or the T is very clearly enunciated at the end of the word. Little things like that help, just that slightly sort of percussive effect, just help emphasize each word even as you're speaking a little more quickly. So diction is a really good skill to have. It makes your speech quite understandable in different contexts. Yeah, so there's some, I think, a well-practiced, carefully measured and very well-balanced presentation, I think. And again, she does end with a little fun hook in the summary, you know, the idea that the little pun, you know, that the epidural stem cells have our back, which is very cute. So as I said, the opening and the closing are very important. Same thing as the other presenters, she opens with a hypothetical and something quite culturally specific to the town she's in, and there's the city and the country at that time of year. She talks about, you know, the sidewalks being like ice rinks in the cold, because she's obviously aware that that is a very recognizable phenomenon to anyone living in Calgary. So it's a very clever sort of analogy that she's used that she knows will be very recognizable to her audience. Rightio. This is another, we're going to change gears again with a very different presentation. This is Afiq Abdul Hamid, who was a finalist from AUT last year. He has, you'll quickly discover, unfortunately, he has quite a lot of heavy scientific methodology that he has to sort of explain. His is obviously very, very complicated in terms of its methodology, but he has a very particular way he goes about trying to describe this. So again, I'm conscious of time, so I'll drop the link in. I'll get you to have a watch and put your hands up, and we'll have a chat. Okay. This one's quite a journey, isn't it? I when I played this in one of my previous workshops earlier this week, it was a very polarizing presentation. Some people think it works very well. Some people think it's harder to follow. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts as well if you want to put them into the chat. I think what's clear is for some of you, it's going to be trickier to address the how than it is with others. If your process is intensely scientific, if you are using a whole series of highly advanced machines to observe something that is, of a particular scale and complexity, you are going to have to make heavy use of analogies, of different comparisons, of reframing devices to distill the essence of what it is you're trying to do. Remember that you don't have to give every step of your methodology to your audience. It is enough to sort of give them the sense of the general process you were going through and pulling out some of the cool bits that might be interesting to them. There is certainly quite a lot of refinement involved in drafting that. So in a fixed case, you'll notice his body language and his voice he uses as really powerful framing devices to help illustrate concepts that are, certainly from my perspective, very difficult to follow. So you'll see he's choreographed this really involved series of gestures. So when he talks about pulsars and sort of swings his arm around, when he bashes his fists together and talks about colliding galaxies and creating black holes and supernovas, he's quite physical in his performance, and he's clearly drafted all of these other movements. So someone's put here, I don't think he could have explained that in any other way. As dramatic as he was, very impressive, particularly his concluding statement. I agree. I think it's clear that there was quite a lot involved in the science of what he's doing. So there was never going to be a really simple way to describe that. There was never going to be a really simple one-step approach to it. But yes, I think by trying to sort of create a sense of, I put in my notes there on the side, dramatic flair, to create a sense of melodrama and tension and excitement. You can, and the other thing too is that also helps convey his passion. When you put your whole body into a performance talking about your research, you can't help but be struck by that person's intense passion and excitement for the thing they do. So it's one of those things where, as I said, jargon and terminology aside, he's used lots of other really fantastic rhetorical and performance devices to help convey all of the really important things the judges and the audience are looking for. But again, my hope with these is to show you different presentation styles and different approaches, different personality types and so on. And hopefully you'll find something in one or more of them that resonate with your own style. Now, again, I know we're at time, but if you'll humor me, I've just got two more to show you, and I think they're both really, really excellent if you've got a few minutes. If you don't, I absolutely appreciate that. The last one in particular, I think, is really quite spectacular. So we'll move on to it quickly. The last two are live performances. I have used them in previous years with some of my training because I think they're really, really fantastic speeches to look at. So Siti Aimi Sarah Zainal Abidin is from the University of Putra, Malaysia. She was a finalist in 2014. We'll jump straight into it. I'll drop the link in. I'll get you to have a watch and we'll have a little chat. Okay, it looks like some of you have finished that now, and I think more finishing at the moment. Fantastic. And some comments straight in. So, wow, she's amazing. Incredible finish, bringing it back to real life implications, and her analogies were so easy to get. Again, I absolutely agree. She uses an extended analogy, which I think is spot on. So she has quite a lot of fun with it. This idea of meet CSI, that she's a meet detective, and it solves so many of the problems that she might have otherwise encountered in methodology. You know, because she's doing something in the lab that visually is quite similar to a very cool thing on a TV show most people have watched. She's able to say, you know, if you've seen CSI, you know, they take samples, they put it into a machine, stuff comes out. She essentially has described her process to you, but she's made it sound very fun and sexy, like a television show. So it's a really fun sort of analogy she has. And it also, I think, ties into the tone she uses. You'll see that even her facial expression, she's got this sort of, like she's telling you a secret, like I'm this secret detective, I'm this meat detective. And it's, as I said, if you find the right framing device like she's done, it just, so as I said, it allows you to answer all these questions and pull everything together so beautifully. An analogy can do so much when it's the right one. And again, someone's put it, agree, cool that she could carry the analogy to cover the 3 questions. Absolutely. So as I said, I really like that. And the other thing, sorry, I love is that, like Sophia, she uses that fun little pithy sort of remark at the end, you know, case closed. It's a great sort of really punchy, fun little end to it. The only thing I think that is a bit tricky, and they only cut to it for a moment, obviously it's a bit different if you can see it the whole time, is her slide. You'll notice that she used a sort of flow chart to show the steps with some clip art, and she also used some newspaper headlines about food crime cases, food adulteration cases. The only problem I would foresee with that, particularly using newspaper cuttings, is you get quite a lot of spidery text and quite a lot of little dialogues and words and, you know, lines and dots and things. It does make it a bit busy to follow. So again, it's not that it works badly here, but it is, again, something to consider. Like, you know, is your slide informative? Sure, but is it too busy as a result? So flowcharts and infographics can be useful if they're still kept very simple, very visual, and there is very little writing involved in them. And on that, we will jump into one final example before we wrap this up. Oh, there we go. This one I have saved to last for a particular reason. It is a very, well, I don't mind telling you, I think it's a very strong presentation, but it uses a very particular device. I mentioned that you are allowed to refer to your slide as much or as little as you want throughout your speech. Rosanna Stevens from ANU, who was the final winner in 2014, and People's Choice, incidentally, she takes her slide and does something quite spectacular with it. So I'm just going to drop the link in. This is the last one. We'll have a watch and then we'll have a chat. Okay, hopefully most of you are reaching the end of that now or just finished. Again, feel free to put your thoughts into the chat. As I said, I don't mind telling you, I'm always blown away every time I see this speech. It captures so well, I think, the fact that 3MT is ultimately about humanizing your research. It is about appealing to the emotions of your audience and not just presenting them with cold facts. It must have a human element to it. And as I said, what she does with her slide is fantastic. She uses it as the foundation. She builds she uses it as an analogy and builds from there. And you can absolutely do that. As I said, you can refer to your slide overwhelmingly during the 3 minutes if you want to. That's absolutely fine. And as I said, it's a fairly bold move to come up there with what is essentially a blank slide and then use it to conjure a really powerful image. So as I said, I always like to throw that one in there to show you that how creative you can be. If you want to come at this from a really unusual angle, that's great. Lean into that. It doesn't have to be. There are well-worn paths for many winners over previous years, but that doesn't have to be the path you take with your presentation. You can absolutely do what you like with it. Rightio. I'll very quickly move on to the final slide here. Now, you'll see this when I send out the slides after this workshop. There are a few links that are useful to you. Obviously, the competition itself is still run at the highest level by the University of Queensland. So their website is there. If you want to get information from the horse's mouth, that's the place to find it. Their handbook I also mentioned is available online. I would absolutely recommend you have a look through that just to see any other advice they give. They even include some basic instructions on how to do video editing through Kapwing, which is a free online video editing suite. So if you don't have access to special software, they do give some instructions on how you can do it for free online using some basic tools. The university's 3MT page is now live with up-to-the-minute information, as detailed from the school heats, college level, university level, as they're all locked in. Those details will appear there. So I would recommend checking that regularly to see what official instructions are coming from the university. And finally, our website is there as well. ANSA, as always, is here to support you if you have questions about this competition, but obviously also questions about anything else related to your candidature or student life. Feel free to jump on there at any time, see what workshops and events are happening, see what clubs are available, so on and so forth. I will not launch into a full spiel about ANSA here. You know who we are. Were there any final questions before we wrap things up today? Rightio. Well, in that case, I would say once again, it's up to you, of course, whether you register and compete, but I would absolutely encourage you to have a crack at it. Whether you get through to the higher levels of the competition or not, it's a great exercise. It's a great thing to practice, a great opportunity. So feel free to give it a go. I wish you the best of luck. If you have any questions, yeah, you're absolutely welcome to contact us and we'll find the answers for you. Thank you all for joining me this morning. Good luck with it.